to share the stopwatch thing again. I managed it in front of everybody, and now I probably won't have to do it in front of the small number of people I meant to.
Well, we all know you're capable. So
yeah,
just from the first time.
Proving the point, yeah. Okay. Right, so let's to share the stopwatch thing again. I managed it in front of everybody, and now I probably won't have to do it in front of the small number of people I meant to. Speakers mind putting in the chat just your speaking order so that we have it. We'll obviously get each one of you to announce it as we go through, but it's really helpful, I find, for the judges when we're going back afterwards to make sure that we have the right speakers down for the right speakers when we're entering it into the ballots. So keep in mind, and also just spelling and things like that. I know it's showing on this page, but at the point when we leave, it won't be. So just to make sure that it's all in the chat and we can still access it if anyone makes any mistakes, if that would be possible. I can't seem to get my screen back. 1 minute.
Sí, o sea, tengo que empezó la 10, la 11, la 15, la 16 y la 26.
Okay. And the other thing that I have done to try and make it easier for people, I know you've got a the stopwatch in front of you, but I have put a little thing that says like 1 minute and stuff. I'm 7 minutes, 8 minutes. I'm going to try and show that up because I'm also mindful if we try and make a noise to indicate when your respective protected and unprotected time starts and ends, you may not necessarily hear it if you're in full flow. In that regard, can I ask all the speakers to start introducing themselves and tell us if they have a particular preferred pronoun for their introductions, and similarly also tell us if they have any preferences for points of information offering. If we can start with swing, first proposition for swing C.
I'm Alejandra Hernandez. I'm first proposition. I think the names are being written down on the chat.
Yeah, that's great. It's like I said, it's just for the end, at the point when you disappear and we suddenly realise we put the wrong person down for the wrong thing. We just want to make sure there's no errors for the tab. And do you have a preference for POIs?
I think through the chat.
You would rather somebody make a note to ask you through the chat?
Yeah, like through the chat, you just ask like POI and I'll see it.
Okay. Second speaker for proposition, please.
I'm Valentina Casasus. I'm the second proposition speaker. My preferred pronouns are she, her. And I have like no preference for POIs. You can either speak or through the chat, whatever the op team prefers is fine with me.
Okay, perfect. Third speaker for the swing, the proposition.
I'm Sofia Morales. My preferred pronouns are she, her. And I would like for the POIs, as Alice said, just write POI in the chat and I'll give you the word. Thanks.
Okay. And which of you are doing the reply speech?
Me, Valentina, the second speaker.
Thank you very much. And Italy, can we introduce the first speaker, please?
Sorry, Ludovica Porro from Italy. For the POI, it's okay for the chat, write POI and I'll get it.
Great. Second speaker, please.
Hi, it's Vito Jessia from Italy. I am doing both the second speech, opposition, and the reply.
Excellent. And the third speaker? I'm sorry, you didn't tell me your POI preference, sorry.
Since anybody's deciding to write down just POI, just do like this.
Okay. Obviously, just to clarify, if people don't spot the chat, people may need to wave or do something. If you notice that you're putting POI down and nobody is picking it up, you may need to make yourself seen in some other way.
Yeah, so eventually we could raise our hand like this, possibly.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully the chat will work perfectly fine, but I just don't want anyone missed opportunity to have the POIs. That applies for everybody. And third speaker?
I'm Sarah Lawler, preferred pronouns she, her, and for POIs, there's no issue, whatever the prop prefers.
Perfect. And the reply speech? Which of the speakers will be doing the reply?
Yeah, I said before, it's me.
Sorry,
I'm the opposition.
My apologies.
No worries.
And very quickly, can I get the fellow judges in the room to introduce yourselves and state your country of affiliation?
I'm Elijah.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
Go ahead,
Elijah. Go ahead, Elijah.
No, please.
Ed William, USA.
Perfect.
Elijah Cochin from Israel.
Brilliant. We have Mark here as well, don't we?
Yeah, Mark Weber, and I'm just a trainee judge, so my ballots don't count, but I will be watching, and I'm from the USA.
You say that with some degree of intimidation, then. I will be watching. And I am Beth Warburton. I'm your chair judge, and I am representing Wales. Right. So I'm just gonna, if everyone could just bear with me 1 minute. I've just had I just need to make sure that I've got the screen and everything set up so that I can actually follow the debate, so that you don't see me doing. Apologies if you sort of see me looking slightly confused for a moment. I'm doing my best with with IT.
Mark, if you can see that, if I don't know if you just saw it, but in the general message group, they just said they're going to be moving you to a different room.
Mark, you get moved to A19 as a panel judge.
Buena pregunta, déjame preguntar al Hedgehog ahorita.
Right. I'm still here. Just give me 1 moment. And Mark, have you picked up those messages?
I think Mark's been moved rooms already, so I think you're good in that regard.
Sorry, I just accidentally closed my stopwatch, so I'm just going to pull it back up again. Just give me 1 moment, if that's all right.
Acabo de checar el draw y no veo una sala 27 en el draw.
Beto, que si mueves a Mark Weber de la 17 a la 19, por favor. Esa es la cosa, que según yo no hay sala 27.
Ya moví a Mark Weber, debe tener su invitación ahí. De hecho, creo que ya está él sí, ya está en sala 19. No había sala 27, pero no sé por qué de último momento me dijeron que metiera a Colombia y tiene un swing, pero no hay juez. Sí, hay sala 27.
Claro, esto fue la ronda como Colombia no perdió la primera ronda automáticamente.
Yes. Okay. Wasn't entirely sure if I'd managed that, but great. If I have, that's well done, me. Okay, perfect. In that case, we're going to proceed on with the round. If anyone has any problems with POIs or anything like that, if you could obviously make sure you're visible if you're not being picked up in the chat, as I've already mentioned, and also if you have any concerns at the end of the speeches, please bring them to my attention and we can try and rectify them. Similarly, try and make yourself known. We'll try and keep an eye, all the judges will try and keep an eye out for any speakers who drop off. But if we don't observe anything or I don't observe anything, please do whatever you can to make sure that we are aware of it so that we can adequately accommodate the timing and make sure that nobody misses out. And without further ado, in that regard, I'd like to invite the first speaker from Swing C to open the debate on behalf of the proposition.
Okay, I'm here.
I'll click start when you say your first bit.
First, we know that in the status quo, people can do this in any sort of place, legally or illegally. Consuming drugs will continue to happen on either side of the house. But by taking these types of measures, what we're inherently trying to fix with this motion is to regulate and understand the drug market in a better way. Now, a little bit of more contextualization. In the status quo, the drug market acts in very different ways, and there is not going to be a single model that guarantees that this will work for everyone. But we think that this looks like selling these drugs in specific markets, hospitals, vending machines, bars, and clubs, as long as it's in non-residential areas. We understand that this happens in the status quo, but we prefer that these drugs are safe because we can regulate these areas and protect the most important stakeholder, that of the consumer. The metric for this debate is that Proposition has to prove that implementing this motion is the best form to regulate the drug market. Now on to my first argument, that of zoning. In this argument, we will prove to you that zoning is the best measure to achieve the regulation within the drug market. Why? My first line of analysis, that of control. Within the status quo, the drug market operates with little to no regulation, maintaining their operation in the dark and taking the lives of millions of people. So what changes when we implement this motion? We have easier regulations than in non-specific areas because we get visibility. Why? Because these are places that we can locate. This looks like it's easier to understand the magnitude of consumption, what comes in and what comes out, and it's easier to act in the case of an emergency. In principle, we think that this measure is the bare minimum for the humanization of an insanely huge market, because drug markets are so insanely unregulated and unseen that users and sellers lack any type of support and very commonly end up in dangerous situations. The government has an intrinsic duty and therefore an incentive to help fix this huge problem. But even in the case that the government lacks this incentive, in principle, because this measurement specifically targets an important visibility that has been not achieved with any other type of measure, which think that this measure should be implemented. But in the practical, we get two benefits. First, we get maximized control of the variable because understanding that previous measures had not worked for regulation, when we have a market that we can locate and which we can act upon, then we can maximize the agency of the government and therefore the ability to change, target, and reform the market that has such a large toll on human life. But second of all, when we get visibility, we're being able to see and regulate the amount of quality and range of drugs bought and sold in the market, which it's safer for the user, but more in that of my third argument. So in the comparative, when we legalize or decriminalize or propose any other type of alternative, we lose such benefits of regulation that we get on our side, right? But now onto my second line of analysis, that if this is not enough, on our side, it is easier to gain taxes from this market and better allocate resources because we have access to the market. Having a location, it makes taxation more effective because we know exactly where to find them. This is important because the government has that responsibility to create taxation such that we can give the benefits back to society. This is why we create higher taxes for products that create damages to the health, like cigarettes or alcohol. On our side, we are trying to harvest benefits from a product that is only bringing damages to societies through taxes. But second of all, we also get a better allocation of resources because we can gather much more information from this market and use it for campaigns for example, decriminalization. But what is the impact? That on our worst case scenario, we don't have as much taxation because we have low government agency, but we still harvest the benefits that we aren't able to achieve on Opposition. But now on to my second argument, that of the drug market. In this argument, we will prove to you how through zoning, we bring more stability to the drug market and reduce the power of drug cartels. but yet you disagree? Point. You have a point?
Yeah. So how would you handle the criminal organizations having the monopoly on the drug system, the drug economy?
Thank you so much. That is exactly what I'm going to talk about in this argument. In this argument, we will prove to you how through zoning we bring more stability to the drug market and reduce the power of the drug cartels. Why? Because first, we get more stability. In the status quo, there is not a geographical location where the drugs are bought, sold, and consumed, and usually occur in neighborhoods with little to no visualization because these activities either taboo or illegal. Why is this a problem? Because the interactions often put the consumers in danger because their sellers are usually anonymous, and whatever they do, they cannot be brought to justice. When we establish these markets, we can have a market that is more stable and thus more safe. Why? Because instead of occurring in secretive and unsafe spaces, the exchanges happen in public and well-known spaces. What does this look like? Drug interactions happen in little places where there are authorities, physical authorities, as well as other people. The benefits of these are clear. First, we get safer interactions because these markets are regulated and there is no necessity for violence as a means for control over the consumers. And right now, the drug interactions become violent because there is a necessity or a need for violence to enforce the basic rules of these interactions. But second of all, we get accountability because if violence does happen, we can actually prosecute rather than staying in the dark because we have the authorities acting in these areas. But why is this important? Because when the market is stable, there is a decreased ability for abuse. Even if we don't stop abuse in all the drug market, in the entirety of all the market, we at least get some regulation over this type of population, over this market, which gives us a benefit that on opposition we don't get. And second of all, in the case of any type of abuse, we actually know about it and it's easier to reference it and have agency over it. But now to my second line of analysis, that of the monopoly, where we answer the POI from opposition, right? In the status quo, drug markets hold a monopoly on the drug market because there is no way to have a safer competition without being driven out of the market. When we implement this motion, we introduce a market that is now a rival for these huge drug cartels. What changes? When the drug markets will be inevitably pushed out of the market because they do not want to be under the government's control. Even if not completely, they will lose certain customers. No, thank you. Because customers have an incentive to go to these types of markets. Even if not all consumers, some consumers will be safer and thus drug cartels will lose some types of customers. Why is this a good thing? Good thing because users have a range of options that drug cartels are no longer entitled to control, right? And now they can choose over high quality drugs that in the past they did not have. And second of all, we reduce their powers because in the moment in which drug cartels are forced out of a safer market, we do think that they lose consumers and income, which are the basis for their power, which reduces their power. So in the comparative, what do we get? On their side, we have the abuse. On their side, they will still have the drug cartels and they will still have them with all the power. While on our side, we decrease their power, and although we might not be able to defeat them completely, we at least create some competition and a safer market for our consumers, which is the most important. So because we have standed for the consumers who are the people that matter in this debate, we've clearly won the benefits and we've clearly won. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll just take one moment for the judges to make our notes, and then we will call the opening speaker from Team Italy. Hang on one moment. Are all the judges happy? Okay. Thank you very much for the opening speaker for opening the debate and the case for Team Proposition. We now move on to Team Italy to open the case on behalf of the opposition. Thank you. Sorry.
And as the circles of Dante's hell were agitated by the flames of the devils, that of the Gospel's cave is a cave of devastation. Legend says that when you approached the park, you could smell death. In reality, what the nostrils felt was the stink of rubbish, vomit, feces, urine, and sweat. That of the withdrawal symptoms. At the end of the 80s, in the Needle Park, there are on average between 3,000 and 5,000 people a day. An army of people who wander, is passed out or collapsed in search of greedy drug dealers to buy those from, trading their daily pelleted. New York Times on the closing of the Needle Park in Switzerland. So what is the Needle Park? The Needle Park, it is a side proposition model exemplification attempted in Switzerland in the 80s that miserably failed. Drug use and distribution was illegal in all of the country, but in the Needle Park, that was an area near one of the main train stations, in which the police decided not to prosecute the addicts and the dealers. So in the last year before its forced closing, Rescue had to reanimate over 3,600 people, and over 100 drug addicts had died on the spot. This is what we're getting for side proposition model. Side proposition doesn't want this to happen again. This is why we are so proud to oppose. We think that side proposition burden in this debate is to prove how their model is effective and that it is realistically practical. On our side of the house, we need to act with a critical eye, working on the comparatives between side proposition models and other measures that are currently being used in the status quo. So before I go on with our case in this debate, some rebuttals. So side propositions talk about taxation, but firstly, the topic doesn't talk about legalizing the production. Therefore, how can you taxate something that remains illegal? Still, if you want to tax it, the taxation will bring higher prices, therefore creating a much more difficult situation for addicts to buy their goods from. And also, the taxation will create a higher risk of black market. They stated that they would inevitably fight the war against the criminal organizations and the criminal cartels, but that is simply not the case. They do not stabilize the market because they are introducing incentives for the drug black market to exist. Why? Because it is much more easy for the drug black market to exist with lower prices, with lower quality, lower prices, and much more clients, much more people interested in it. So therefore, their position in this debate is simply creating a much more harmful situation, and it is enhancing the drug problem in the status quo. So also about visibility, they think that they think that visibility would help to see and regulate the drugs. But simply, the visibility that you're getting from a specific drug area would stigmatize the problem, because you are either excluding them or looking at them as they were like a zoo attraction. But on our specific position in this debate, we are bringing you three constructive points on the team line. Specific non-residential areas causes more harm than good. 3 points of this. Firstly, I'm going to explain to you how it's an ineffective measures. My second speaker will explain to you how the proposition solution lacks in educational and cultural components. Thirdly, he is going to explain to you how the status quo is made of effective values and solutions we can't forget about. So on the point of how it's an ineffective measures. As said before, side proposition model will reassemble Switzerland Needle Park experience, and we don't want that. I'm bringing you three sub-points in this debate. The first one is that specific non-residential areas will enhance the black market. Why? So we are okay with that. Drug consumption, black market, and organized crime will always exist, and it is impossible to eliminate it. But on the comparative, side proposition is worsening the situation by enhancing the black market, empowering organized crimes, and increased drug consumptions. Why? Firstly, because it will never find a balance between making the measure appealing for drug dealers and addicts, and at the same time introduce safety elements such as healthcare safety and security. Why? Firstly, because there will be no control on the drugs that are being sold. The drug composition would remain unknown, and the risk of accidental overdose would be high. But even if there were controls, the dealers would simply move to other zones in order to sell low-quality drugs for cheaper prices, creating a parallel illegal market of drugs as we see in Amsterdam, where marijuana is illegal, but the presence of cheaper, low-quality market is big. This cheap, low-quality market will also attract addicts and will bring the situation back to its origins. Therefore, side proposition model is ineffective. But on the control for security, police would be present in order to keep the environment safe and prevent wrongs. But if the police intervene frequently, eventually move in other areas.
Oh, sorry.
In other unbottled spaces. So the solution
Sorry, that's what it said on the chat, but okay, whoever's the first off.
They would move away as have been
No,
doing
it's all good.
in the middle part, where the police would never get out of their armored cars because the brawls were too many, and because if they intervened, people would have moved away. But on the contrary, we don't have this on-site opposition. I'll get your point.
Judges, notice that black markets are the status quo, and we are creating a safer option regulated by the
Turn on
government.
your video, Regina.
I don't see the POI in this, but still, you are actually enhancing the black market. You're worsening the situation. And also, with site proposition model, you are not legalizing the production, and the prices will still remain high. So in order to have more earnings, drug dealers would cut the drugs with other harmful substances, and this would increase the possibility to develop more heavy addictions. But still, if we legalize the production, the prices would initially plummet, also increasing the interest of other people to try them, right? So the demand would make the prices eventually skyrocket, making it almost impossible for addicts to buy the dose from, increasing crime rates, withdrawals, and death cases, as happened in Zurich in the middle part, where heroin would cost almost 230 euros. So at the end of the day, you are worsening all the situation. On the comparatives, we are not having this on our side of the house, because with decriminalization policy in Zurich and in Portugal, the number of new users declined from 900 in the 90s to 150 in 2004. But still, unifying the selling and consumption, the selling and the consumptions is counterproductive. Why? Because addicts would have even more incentives in consuming more, because they will be even more tempted in doing so. Why? It's like putting a kid in a room full of candies. The kid will be tempted in eating more. The kid will be tempted in eating more and more candies, and it will eventually have a high lifetime crisis. With drug addicts, they will be tempted, and it will have more and more doses developing severe addictions, worsening their financial situation, and possibly committing more crimes, wouldn't it? So, not making it on our side of the house, on the periods, not making getting a dose easy to get would prevent people from falling into the spiral, and also it would prevent current addicts from developing heavy addictions or accidental overdoses. And in the case of Portugal, and as we see in the case of Portugal and Switzerland, decriminalization, current policy would have mandatory rehabilitation process. Therefore, it will be much more effective. But also, this will be much more extended from my second speaker.
Perdón, que se me olvidó esa parte. Sí, lo que pasa es que Colombia se registró tarde, entonces por eso no los estamos incluyendo en la primera ronda, con una pérdida automática, y ya los vamos a integrar empezando la segunda ronda, ya de ahí debate normal.
So therefore, I don't think that type of proposition model is ineffective because it will increase crime rate and have a heavy cost on society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just give the judges a minute. And if we can move back to the second speaker's content proposition to continue the case for swing C.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, I think so.
Oigan, voy a hacer un cambio en el número de salas porque se me mancha la opinión. Ahorita se las vuelvo a mandar.
Is everyone ready? Let's go first into a recharacterization of what this debate means, is, and what we need to defend as a proposition team regarding the opposition's framework. We first tell you in our first speech, and I will be expanding a little bit on how do we think that this should actually look like. We think that these zoning measures do propose for these to be limited, or for drug selling and consumption to be limited to certain places. We do think that this looks like selling these drugs in specific places, be it we propose things like clubs, pharmacies, hospitals, vending machines, and bars. Why? First, because we think that people have access to as the professionals that can actually help them when they have these types of addiction problems. But second, we think that we target the most vulnerable population when we talk about clubs and bars because of the fact that there is where the most amount of consumption happens. Please, judges, note that we tell you since the first speech that drug consumption does continue happening on both sides. We ask the question on which side do we regulate the market better, right? The opposition comes up here and basically denies the proposition's case in the moment in which they frame to us this idea that they completely disregard our case by negating our best case scenario, right? They paint this idea in which we will have a completely ineffective mechanism, right? But I'll be telling you why even in this case, we still win, right? They first talk about this idea of practicality and their burden, which we think that isn't the best debate because of the fact that when we are only debating on terms of practicality, we can't really go into things like principles, but we'll still debate here just to not make the debate one-sided. Let's go into some refutation with some integrated re-strengthening of our own arguments. The opposition goes into a first speech where they talk to us about no control on the selling and buying of drugs, and second, no government incentives to ask people, right? We tell you that we frame to you a market where this is completely legal. We frame to you a market where, yes, we do have higher prices, right? They come up here and they tell you the black market will be much, much worse. They come to you and they tell you we are bending the law, right? We tell you that this is already legal in most places, right? We think that we do have control because of this legality. We do have control because the government is inherently involved in doing these types of things, right? Because of the fact that if not, we cannot have an effective measure. We do not fulfill our mechanism, as we tell you in our first speech. But second, on the point on higher prices, right? Which they come into their second argument where they tell you we will have withdrawal, we will have all of these negative impacts. We tell you that we do believe that people have a preference for safety, right? We think that this is the reason why people do wait for organs on the organ donor list, for example, instead of going and buying it on the black market. We do think that there is a preference for this idea of safety. We do think that people pay these higher prices because of the fact that they want to be safe. But even in the case in which they did not, we think that there is no possibility for this to become a black market because A, this black market already happens in the status quo where we have these huge drug cartels that Ale talks to you about. But second, because of the fact that we do have this government involvement, it is very, very complicated for this to become a black market when the government is already involved. Let's talk a little bit about our arguments as well, right? We talked to you first about humanization, about the control of variables, about visibility. We see little to no refutation, except for the point that this will completely not happen, right? We think that this is very, very weak refutation from the opposition in the moment in which we tell you, well, there's no way for this happening with absolutely no explanation. But second, we think that they do not have this in their alternative of decriminalization, right? Where they come up here and don't really explain what this means, but we do tell you, A, to what extent does this really go, and B, why is this not worth it? Right? We do think that when we have this government involvement, we have A, the biggest actor involved in actually beginning to change this stuff. But second, we have a very big impact in terms of actually being able to prosecute people and actually being able to control these things. It's something that the opposition cannot have. When we have this control, we have an agency not just to bring justice, but we have an agency to keep consumers safe. Second, in the term of drug cartels, we see actually little to no rebuttal to this argument where we first talk to you about stability on regulation, right? We tell you that within the status quo, over 1 million people die from drug-related violence. We have these huge drug cartels where their power stems from Mexico to Russia, right? We tell you that even if we can have some marginal type of impact on these huge monopolies of power, we are having a very huge impact. On the side of the proposition, we see little to no refutation. But let's go into my third argument where we talk to you about the security of the youth. We tell you that we will prove to you within this argument that implementing this motion allows for the priority of user security and prioritization. Why? Because within the status quo, we see that 600,000 people have died as a result of drug intoxication only in the year 2017 because of the bad quality of drugs that drug cartels are selling in their monopoly that the proposition has absolutely no alternative to solving. We tell you what changes under our measure. First, in terms of security. Let's talk about quality. Because the market is regulated, we think that the government has the ability to impose quality control and also produce things, and also because of the fact that producers are local, as we tell you in our mechanism that we will have these reduced to certain types of local pharmacies and things around, we think we do have higher standards for production. We have less of this risk that has killed 600,000 people. Second, in terms of visibility, because we shift the focus on consumers, we have the newfound ability to protect them from any type of immediate danger because of the fact that we have seen that only in the last year, 100,000 people died from violent drug interactions. And third, in terms of alternatives, right? We tell you that because drug consumption is no longer limited to low quality drugs in dangerous places, we fulfill their right to at least consume without a lethal risk. Why is this so important? Just because of the fact that we at least provide some sort of marginal benefit for consumers that the opposition cannot give, right? They talk about decriminalization, but what they cannot say is A, they give security to users who actually go out and get these drugs, or B, they have the ability to actually have their aggressors go to jail because of the government involvement. I can take a POI before I go on to my second line.
So, oh, sorry.
Go on.
Okay, so what specifically about Prop's model actually helps the well-being of the consumers directly?
Right, we tell you since the beginning that what we will have is a regulation within these people, which firstly brings them the first benefit of not having to risk their lives when they go to get the drugs. But second, what we do have is because of this government involvement, the ability to impose quality control. And second, because of the involvement of these local consumers or these local producers, we have better quality, right? We tell you that this is something that does not happen within the status quo and it's intrinsic to our side. But my second line of analysis talks about priority. We tell you that what zoning is doing is providing a safe space for consumers to buy and begin to actually concede that drug consumption is inevitable. What we need to do is regulate it. When we place consumers at the forefront, which is something that has not been able to do within the status quo, we think that what changes is when we actually begin to target the structural problems within the drug industry. What we actually begin to change is the root of the problem, which are these producers, these low standards, and this ability to have absolutely no control over the market. So what we do on the proposition side is begin to change this structural problem. We begin to change this larger framework behind something that opposition does not do, something that opposition disregards people from.
Thank you very much. We'll just take a moment for the judges. Okay, hang on 1 second. Perfect. Right, thank you very much to the speaker, and we now move back to Team Italy and their second speaker to continue their case.
Can you listen to me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. When Inside Proposition decides to identify only one problem in this debate, they are bringing an extremely narrow framing of this debate that we have to widen, of course. It is not enough for said proposition to prove that this measure is effective only on black market issue. Drug crisis is something that is much more complicated, and therefore they have to prove that they are capable of addressing much more problems in order for that policy to be considered as effective. But even if we have already proven you that said proposition is failing in solving black market, as long as we have proven this, also with an example, the example of Amsterdam, where basically legalization caused rise pricing, and basically this caused also what we call a black market. But we have already proven you that what they're doing on their side of the house, the problems that you're trying to tackle with, they already failed to engage with it. But there are plenty of other problems that need to be addressed. I'm going to give you an example, such as urban degradation. Is a problem nowadays society that people see the fact that there are crimes in urban areas, and these are obviously is regarded to as urban degradation. But I'm also going to explain you why there's on their side of the house you're not capable of solving the problem of urban degradation. Simply because when people have the chance to enter those areas and basically take drugs in that place, but there are some drugs that basically have, for example, that the effects of some drugs could last, for example, from 4 to 12 years, to 12 hours, as it happens with LSD or cocaine, for example. So as long as you, in the moment in which you step out of these residential areas, you're actually still having the effect of drugs. Basically, you're still likely to commit crimes. Basically, you're still likely to act in a way that is not respectful of laws, and therefore their side of the house is not only failing on engaging with the problem of black market, but they also fail on engaging with the problem of urban degradation that they haven't said, because of course they know that they fail. By this being said, I would like to tackle with one major point that has been brought up by first speaker. I would like to play down in this specific case the connection between the visibility and the easier control. If you are putting actually police control, as you said in your model, into these areas, this is not going to be appealing both for drug dealers and for drug users, simply because drug users are, of course, reluctant because they don't want to be identified or linked to activities that in the rest of society and outside of that area are still considered as a crime. And you're also preventing drug dealers from entering this area because they are afraid, of course, of being associated with otherwise illegal activity that would permanently damage their reputation and exposing themselves to part of the investigation from the police. As a matter of fact, to explain you why people won't even enter to those areas, I'm going to give you the example of Berlin pink zones. Basically, the mayor of Berlin decided to establish those pink zones in the park, in which it was legal for people to use drugs, to sell them, and to buy them. But what happened was that people didn't even enter there because they were reluctant, as I've proven you. So if people don't enter there, how can you even imagine to control them? Basically, they fail on engaging on the point of controlling. On their model, there's one thing that I would like to point out. They're saying that they're doing this specifically in clubs and bars, as long as these are the places where drug addicts gather the most. But bars and clubs actually are in the residential areas because they are surrounded by homes, and you just can't do it because you have to say that those specific areas should be implemented in non-residential areas. But as long as we are proving you that bars and clubs exist in residential areas simply because they have to be surrounded. They are surrounded by homes and by people. You just can't do it. This is like completely unfair, and you're forcing the model. But as you said before, as long as the majority of people gather at this point, we are failing in engaging with the majority of people. We don't give the possibility to the majority of people to enter these areas, as long as you said that those people gather the most in those places. I would like also to say something about the fact that you said that people have a preference in general for safety, therefore they will choose to enter those places. But actually, this is just not the case for a drug addict. This works only for rational people, not for people who are under the effect of LSD or cocaine, who obviously do not think rationally. They think are in the logic that what can satisfy my drug need the most, a higher price or a low price drug. Basically, obviously, they are going to choose the low drug price. By this being said, I would like to also tackle with their third argument on the security of the use, because they basically say that they're going to put this quality control and this will prevent people from dying because of intoxications. Well, if you put purity tests in the area, this will force the producers to make a more expensive product, which dealers then have to sell.
No worries.
And more likely, people will simply step away from the areas and sell. And they will simply step away from the areas and sell less pure substances on again a newly transform the black market. And again, we are proving you that they fail on engaging with the most important problem that they identified. Because in the moment in which you put quality controls, people are going to step out of the areas and sell drug at a lower price to people, and basically potentially implementing another black market. But this being said, I would like to present our second argument, saying that proposition solution lacks educational and cultural approach. Drugs are an extremely complex phenomenon that is deeply connected to culture. I'm going to give an example here. When there was an opioid crisis in Pennsylvania in the 90s, people didn't start using fentanyl simply because they wanted to. We had this problem because a culture was spreading, suggesting that fentanyl could help ease pain caused by rising unemployment in Pennsylvania. So when it comes to solve such a complex problem made up of values and ideological components, any policy should have a broad view providing an educational approach. We believe that the proposal of creating a drug-friendly era is a policy that lacks completely the educational approach, and therefore proposition proposal is a failed proposal. However, there are two other problems with oppositions. First, that this means accepting the drug culture and making it a normal thing. And this also means that we are normalizing distorted behaviors. What do I mean? We're basically saying to those workers in Pennsylvania that it's completely normal consuming drugs in response to unemployment. Second problematic point with their proposal is that they are going to reinforce the drug culture by feeding the drug myth. If side proposition policy were implemented, we would experience an attractive honeypot effect. This means that people, especially those that have not been involved in the drug market before, are likely to feel attracted by this mysterious and appealing place. As it happened with, for example, with the Christiania community in Copenhagen, where drug dealing is done without problems, that basically we experienced in Christiania a mass drug tourism from all around Europe, to an extent that now Christiania is one of the top places visited in Copenhagen. Now moving on our third argument, that's saying that the status quo is made of effective solutions we cannot forget about. There are specific strategies universally recognized as effective by the United States Office of Drugs and guided by principles that always apply when it comes to the drug crisis. Now, when side proposition is drafting a proposal, no matter how promising it may be, but that does not include valued approaches shared from the international community, then that is likely to become a failed proposal. Two layers of analysis here. First, on the importance of inclusive policies, and the second, of the importance of health and medical assistance. They failed in engaging with inclusive policies as long as there's a risk of social discrimination remain inside, because they're keeping people out of the drug areas. And they fail with encouraging health and medical assistance because they're not providing health assistance. But apart from that, my third speaker will implement this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The judges would like to take a moment before we move on to the third speakers. I'd now like to move back to team proposition and invite the third speaker to continue their case. Thank you. In the moment in which team opposition's alternative is the status quo, in which thousands of people die just because they want to fulfill their desire of consuming drugs, is in the moment in which we see the main flaw in their case. Three clash points in this debate. First, the government, second, the users, and third, the market. So let's get first to the point of the government. First of all, in our first argument, we told you about zoning and about how it is much more
easier to regulate the drug market when we have this type of visibility and when the government has this type of accountability to act in case of an emergency, right? We also told you on our second line of analysis the point of regulation, which was the only part that was touched by Team Opposition, in which we basically told you that it was easier to regulate these kinds of drug markets precisely because we're taxating them, right? We believe that we explained pretty clearly why this taxation is key in order to give back something to the people, because it is the government's responsibility to actually assure that the harms that drugs are causing are retributed by money at least, right? So they basically told us that with taxation, this is not beneficial because prices would go up. 3 responses to this point. 1, this taxation doesn't have to be enormous because it doesn't have to be an enormous extra cost because there's a lot of profit as the duty as there's a high demand on the market, right? So we see that there's no necessity for taxing these people so much when the market, when the drug market has a very high demand. Secondly, we told you that competition is created in the legal market. Therefore, by basic economy rules, the prices would eventually decrease to the point in which they become more accessible to the vast majority of people. And thirdly, even if none of this happened in our worst case scenario, and prices do skyrocket, we still have the benefit of legalization, right? People will always prefer to do things legally rather than illegally. 1, because it is much more accessible. They go to much more accessible places and to zones in which they don't need to risk their lives in order to fulfill this desire. And secondly, because they don't get into any sort of legal problem. So what would be easier? Paying your way out of jail or literally buying a drug on this safe market, right? So we tell you that in their best case scenario in which these prices do increase a lot because the government taxes them, we still have this benefit that they never answered to. Also, on this part of the government, we still have the point of accountability, which has been barely touched by the opposition. We tell you that in the status quo, precisely because the government is not the agent of action to regulate these places, there's a lack of bringing to light of justice all of these struggles that people face. So at least when we do this, we force the government to take accountability over these people. We force the government to take accountability over these places, and we force the government to actually show results when they are the ones that are held in charge of these places. But yes, you disagree. You have a point.
Yes, I do. How would you think that a drug addict in a financial crisis would prefer to buy legal, high quality, more expensive drugs?
Thank you. Even in our worst case scenario in which there's a like an amount of people who actually do prefer having this cheaper experience, at least we're giving them a choice, right? We're giving a choice for those people that can actually afford it to buy safe drugs. So onto the second clash point, that of the users. We need to understand the incentive of these drug consumers. These drug consumers want to consume drugs without endangering their lives or being feared if the drugs that they are consuming are going to be lethal or not. The response that opposition gives us to this point is only rational people would choose to do this. And in the moment in which they dehumanize drug users by saying that they are not even rational people that can make decisions by themselves, it's in the moment in which we already win this point, because at least we're giving these people a choice, because at least we understand that these people have an incentive to live. No, thank you. So we prove the best for users in 3 main points. First, on the zoning point, when we have this much more easier to regulate zones, there's an easier way to act in case of an emergency. If there's a violent conflict, the government or the authorities can act because they know where it's happening, because they know when it's happening. So at least these consumers get this authorities on their side, right? We also told you about security. Like literally, these places are going to be much more secure because they're going to be safer neighborhoods, enlightened places versus on their status quo, on their side of the house, these super sketchy neighborhoods in which there's a lot of crimes and in which these places are constantly subject to tons of violence, right? And then we also told you about quality in our third argument, and we tell you that when the government is the agent that is regulating these markets, it is much easier to get all of those lethal drugs out of the way, right? And we also told you about the stigma. And here's when the point of information that Team Opposition made comes in handy, right? They told us, how do we give benefits to the well-being of these people? We answer this by saying that at least this gets normalized. They see this as a problem. They see that drug users being normalized is a problem. However, we see it as a solution. Why? Because at least people are able to access to healthcare without being judged. People are actually able to access to rehab without being judged because of the fact, no thank you, that these actions are starting to get normalized, right? And they never explain to us how they get an alternative in which they actually do normalize this, in which they can actually assure the best for the users. But now onto the third clash point, that of the market. Basically, on our second argument, we told you about the drug monopoly, right? And about how there's a drug monopoly in the status quo. At least, even in the case in which we cannot take the full power out of the black market, at least we can give people a choice. And in the moment in which we can give people a choice between the legal and the illegal is in the moment in which we have the upper hand in this debate, because they criticize the black drug market a lot, but they never explain how on their side the black market loses power. They never explain to us how on their side they're gonna regulate this better. So on their side, the black drug market still has the monopoly. At least on our side, we create a competition with the legal drug market, and that's already a new beginning. That's already something better, right? Because these places create a competition. And even in the worst case scenario in which these illegal drug markets do resist this competition, we believe that we incentivize them to improve the quality of their products when the competition they have sells cheap and high quality products. They need to do the same as well. Vote for the team that actually gives a solution to the problem that has cost way too many lives. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just take one more moment for the judges. Okay, thank you again to the speaker for concluding the substantive part of the debate for Team Proposition, Eastern C. We now move to the third speaker from Team Opposition, Team Italy, to conclude the substantive part of their case.
Okay, so I would like to begin my case inviting the judges to take a step back and look at what Proposition is actually proposing here. So first of all, their model has got to do with regulating drug use in certain areas, therefore legalizing drug use, sale, consumption within a certain area. And they say that this will decrease the effects of the black market, it will decrease the effects of violence, and it will guarantee more security and substance control for the people using it, and finally, access to a space without judgment. None of these statements are correct, and our team has already proven why, but I would like to start rebutting the third speaker's points. So first of all, she talked about government and zoning and how taxation could regulate the black market and increase control over these areas. But our team has already told you why these same factors make those areas unappealing. The key question here is, what are the incentives for users to go to these areas? Already they're in non-residential areas, meaning they have to migrate from where they live in order to use these areas. Let's paint a picture here. If we take the average heroin user, who on average exactly takes 6 doses a day, this means that they have to leave their home every day 6 times in order to use. So what will really happen here? Will the user actually go to this area, or would they rather take their chances within the privacy of their own home and risk the legal consequences? And this, moving on to the second point, the last speaker said that people prefer legality. And I agree, generally, yes, but here we're talking about people who already live on the margins of legality. Drug dealers and users and producers already live in illegality, and this hasn't prevented them from taking a step back from their activity. So much so that prohibitionism has failed, as both teams have asserted. Another point the last speaker made was on visibility and how visibility brings justice. But let me take you back to the point of these areas being appealing. This, again, takes away even more incentive for these people to actually go to these areas, because visibility, as our second speaker has already explained, creates exposure, and this dampens again the incentive for these people to go, because if you're exposing yourself in this manner, to directly quote one of the users from the pink zones in Berlin, they said they didn't want to go because they risked being seen by people they knew. In Portugal, for example, 1% of the population before the intervention of decriminalization was dependent on heroin. Many of them were professionals, such as, for example, lawyers who did not want to compromise their reputation by exposing themselves going to these areas. So this point has not been defended adequately. Another point that was made was that this is a chance to buy safe drugs, but because this would be lowering the price point and therefore it would have government control. But there are two situations here. The drugs are either safe because there is testing at the site, which again is another reason why people should not be incentivized to go there, because it would mean that drug dealers would have to raise the quality of their drugs. So as our team has already said, it's more likely that instead of adjusting their product, the drug dealers and producers will simply open up and incentivize a black market because it's cheaper, because it's easier. Also, they talked about the chance that if someone can afford it, to buy better quality drugs. But this is already the status quo. All drugs are illegal, and among illegal drugs, there are higher and lower quality at different price points. There already is the possibility for people who can afford it to access products like pure cocaine rather than one that is that has other products that are damaging. But again, the impurity of drugs isn't the only issue. It's not the only killer here. Even pure drugs can kill people. So the real root issue here that the side opposition has not addressed is drug abuse, which our team thinks is much more urgent than the point on the black market, that which is the only point truly that the proposition side brought. Yes, I'll take a POI.
If I am a person with money to afford the drugs in the market, how will I get protection or accountability on your side?
Well, okay, so I'd like to introduce you here to one of the many models that exist that actually protect the users, which is a goal that our team will actually obtain rather than what proposition will lead to. So at the moment, there is a model of safe injection spaces. The first and ultimately most successful example of this was in Vancouver and Insight. This site can boast no deaths in 17 years of use. What this site does is it gives people a space, first of all, to use drugs safely, meaning not only that they won't be under scrutiny, but also they have nurses nearby to help them inject these substances. So this is a far more feasible and a far more effective manner of curbing the problem of the actual dangers of the use itself brings. Again, it boasts no deaths in over 3 million users in 17 years of operation, and it has favored the movement from drug use to drug rehabilitation. It's an open space where people feel like they won't be judged, and I'll be addressing this point later, feel like they won't be judged and will be able to consume the products and will actually be treated as patients and with humanity, something that side proposition accused us of not having. Our side isn't saying that that there is a perfect model for getting rid of the use of drugs, because the use of drugs will always exist, as most experts will tell you. What we're saying is that side proposition doesn't deal with this issue at all. In fact, it worsens it by, again, incentivizing the black market and, again, giving access to cheaper drugs. Again, another point that wasn't specified in the model by proposition was whether minors will have access to these areas or not, because usually legalization means that there's an age limit. But here we open up another issue. Either they allow people who are underage to access these areas, meaning they will be putting everybody in the same area, meaning 14-year-old weed dealers who just want to make 50 extra bucks every week will be put next to big-time cocaine dealers, meaning meaning that these people will be exposed to much more dangerous realities and risk being recruited by these higher criminal organizations. On the other hand, if you do have an age limit for these areas, this doesn't mean that minors will stop using drugs. It'll mean that minors will not have access to these areas and to the legality, which again, our team even questions whether anybody would have any incentive to go to these areas. But even if they did have incentive to go to these areas, they wouldn't be allowed in if it did even bring any benefit. So continuing in my rebuttal, side proposition told us that we consider people who use drugs irrational. And let me explain this sentence. We're not saying that the people themselves are irrational and must be treated as less than human. We're saying that long-term drug effects do lead people to make irrational decisions. If you look at any testimony on the part of people who have dealt with serious drug issues, they will say that the only thing they thought about was getting their next fix, meaning we cannot expect these people to act rationally. They cannot see the world clearly. And these are my words. These are the words of people who have actually been through this entire process. Again, proposition brought the issue of emergency, saying that authorities could deal with this issue effectively. We already told you why the presence of authorities is not going to be an incentive, meaning that people will not actually go to these areas in the first place. And second of all, have provided an alternate model, which is that of Insight in Canada, which again boasts no deaths. Another advantage of Insight is that it was placed within a critical residential area, which means that we eliminate the issue of migrating from one place to the other. Again, last point from side proposition was that we would have safer neighborhoods. But let me address this issue quickly. So the actual moment when the person takes the drugs isn't what's risking the safeness of neighborhoods. Again, it's the mental degradation that comes with long-term use. Let's imagine a heroin addict during a high. They have absolutely no control over their body. They are not going to be violent in that moment. So that's clearly not the issue here. So again, what our team is advocating for is a more humane approach. Therefore, not approaching the issue from a legal standpoint like side proposition has done, but we are advocating for a position that actually deals with the users, which side proposition says they're doing, but aren't actually doing. We actually are. If we address systems that already exist, like Insight and like depenalization in Portugal, with state-backed harm reduction interventions, these are examples of actual solutions, which once again, compared to side proposition, are always better. Side proposition brings so many disadvantages. It is partial legalization, meaning that it has all the issues of legalization and all the issues of prohibitionism put together. So finally, I hope the judges will evaluate all of these considerations in their final evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the speakers from side opposition. We'll just take one moment before we invite the reply speakers to conclude their case. 1 second. Okay, a reminder that the reply speeches are 4 minutes. And come on a second, let me just get my mouse to cooperate with me. There you go. I'd like to invite the reply speaker from Team Italy to conclude their case.
Let's evaluate this debate through the major clash points here. First, black market. Side opposition tells us that they're going to tackle the black market as long as it is the most controversial situation in the world and the most problematic thing. This is why we have to tackle with this point. Actually giving no points, no examples on the basis of which we should evaluate whether this is actually happening or not. On our side of the house, we're telling you that with your policies, you actually have an implementation of the black market for 2 reasons, basically. First, because of taxations that will basically cause people to open up a black market, to cause drug dealers to open up a black market in which they can sell drug to a cheaper price, potentially having more people buying. And second of all, you are actually implementing the black market because you are posing quality controls. And when you pose quality controls, again, prices get high. And when prices get high, people have of course, as I said before, will have to step out from the zone and sell those drugs in a black market. Then I believe it's completely unfair for inside opposition to say all in their third speech that that the taxation is going to be low. Well, then we think this is too late for them to evaluate this point. On black market, again, I would like to make a clarification. We don't have any duty to solve this problem. You said that you are going to solve this, and this is why we have proven you that you are not, and we have proven you that you are not, which is why we are winning the point concerning the black market. On to the second clash point. Again, what are actually drug consumer? They say, without any proof, without any evidence, and without any rational explanation, that drug consumer, as any other people in the world, are, of course, rational people, and therefore they have a preference for safety. But we have proven you that under the effect of drugs like LSD or cocaine that potentially last from 4 hours to 12 hours, you cannot be irrational simply because you are a drug addict to people, and basically those things act on your mind, and they change the way you think. They change the way a person decides to think. They transform a person from a rational being that we recognize in the beginning to an irrational being that it was obviously caused by drug addiction. Secondly, we are saying you that these people already live in illegality, and nothing had stepped them back from illegality. So as my third speaker said, we're again proving you that they are not rational, which is why we are also winning the second point of clash again, drug consumers, whether to be considered as rational people or not. But then let's come to the third clash point, potentially the most important one, on the overall effectiveness of the policy. Side proposition is basically saying that it's going to be effective because there is going to be secure and it's going to be controlled, again, with no evidence and with no proof. While we are saying here on our side of the house that this policy isn't going to be effective for different reasons. Let's analyze them step by step. First, we have said that this is not going to be beneficial because it's non-residential. And as long as it's not residential, people will have problems in accessing that because it's out of their range of accessibility. So we are not actually facilitating the access to people. Second, on security, because people won't enter because of policy, because they're afraid of policy. And we have proven you with an example of Berlin pink zones. And again, it is not effective because there's a quality control, because they're preventing people from entering, again, also proven with the example of the Berlin pink zones. And also it is not effective because they're on the point of neighborhood security, because we have told you that people would still be under the effect of drug in the moment in which they step out from these areas, basically meaning that under the effect of these drugs, they can potentially make illegal and anti-morality actions that are obviously can also be considered illegal. And please, judges, I beg, which is why we win the point on effectiveness. Please, judges, I beg you not to follow side opposition proposal that we have proven you to be ineffective twice times. First, back to 1890, when the proposal you were making was applied in Zurich and failed, and now having proved you through all the debates that this is ineffective, which is why we're so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the speaker. Just give me one moment. Thank you very much. I'd now like to thank all the speakers from Team Opposition for their debate, and invite the final speaker to present the reply speech for Swing C to conclude the case for Proposition and the case for the debate as a whole.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me well?
Yep.
Let's first characterize how this debate looks, what we told you as Proposition, what the opposition said, and why we win this debate. Let's first talk about how these areas will look like. We tell you since the first speech that what we propose is to sell in pharmacies, hospitals, clubs, and bars with locally produced drugs. The opposition comes up here and tells us in our third speech an alternative that is underdeveloped and a bit late, right? We tell you that even in the case in which we did follow this alternative, we think that we still win because of the fact that we have all these intrinsic benefits that we tell you since the beginning of this debate. But second, let's talk about the incentives. The opposition talks about 3 points: location, legality, and security. So let's first talk about location. They see a huge problem where people will have to go somewhere, right? And these people moving to get these drugs. We tell you that this will happen anytime because people will still live away from these drug producers, right? We tell you that this is not mutually exclusive and on both sides. But second, in terms of legality, they tell you people will not want to go to these places. People do not want this, right? We tell you that first, people do have an incentive to do things legally because of the fact that they do not want to go to jail. But even in the case if this was not true, we think that people do have a human instinct, right? We tell you people do not want to die. And we tell you that drug addicts do fall within this category. And even in the case and this was not true, we think that at least providing them with an alternative is, in the very least, humanizing. And third, in terms of security, we tell you over 1 million people die yearly because of a lack of regulation, a lack of change. So even marginal, we think that we do have huge impacts on the proposition team, especially because of the fact that opposition concedes a huge issue within the status quo with a very, very underdeveloped alternative. But let's talk to you about why we win on the principles and on the practical side of the debate. First, on principles, where we talk about a principle of humanization on both sides. Let's ask, where do we get more of this? We tell you first on the proposition, we protect users, we place them as a priority, we understand and conceive the issue that they have and try to help them, and we provide to you a choice, right? An alternative. On the opposition, they tell you, we leave it the same, or they do talk to us about a very, very important cultural problem, right? We can see that this is huge, but we tell you there is an urgency to fix this. Cultural problems take a very long time. We think that if we do not do this now, we have no way to actually save the lives of so many people who are losing them, right? We win on this point because we actually place these people first. We place them as a priority rather than waiting for them to end up dying alone with absolutely no help. We think that this is huge. But on the practical side, we ask you, who effectively targets and regulates the drug market? We tell you, A, the opposition has little to no construction on how they will be doing this, right? But they ask us 3 points. First, in terms of control, second, in terms of visibility, third, in terms of stability. We tell you visibility is very important because of the fact that what we have then is accountability. Second, in terms of control, we tell you because the government can actually see what's happening, because we know where these people are, we at least have a way to know what's going on, to gain information, to see what is actually happening, right? We tell you that this is something that the opposition has no way of doing. And we think that this information is so huge because of the fact that we can help those who are suffering. But third, in terms of stability, right? We tell you what we bring right now is some sort of change, some sort of alternative where we can get drugs, where we can have a market where we see these drugs do not lead to death. These drugs do not destroy the lives of so many human beings. So why do we win on the prop? Because we tell you on the principle, on the practical, and on the mechanism why we win, how we change, and how we have these very, very huge impacts now and for the future.
Great, thank you very much to the speaker, but in fact, thank you very much to all the speakers for a very interesting and engaging debate. Congratulations for completing round 1 of WSDC Online 2020. I'm going to put myself on mute. No, actually, I won't put myself on mute, but I will put myself on invisible if I can get my computer to cooperate. And I need to notify the Allcom for the judges to be moved to the breakout room.
Hello, I'm part of the Allcom. Yeah, we are going to move you in a moment.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Don't you worry.